What happens when the most powerful person in the room realizes they've been completely wrong about someone?
Admiral Richardson had seen thousands of officers walk through his doors. He prided himself on reading people instantly, their background, their capabilities, their worth to the Navy. In 35 years of service, he believed he could judge any sailor's potential with a single glance.
Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was about to prove him devastatingly wrong.
Standing barely 5 feet tall in her crisp dress blues, she appeared to be just another diversity-hired young, inexperienced, probably promoted too quickly to fill quotas. The Admiral's dismissive chuckle echoed through the Pentagon briefing room as she introduced herself as the mission commander for Operation Silent Thunder, the Navy's most classified underwater rescue mission. But, when she rolled up her sleeve to check her watch, everything changed. There, etched in faded black ink on her forearm, was a tattoo that made the Admiral's blood run cold. It was a symbol he hadn't seen in 20 years, one that belonged to an elite group of warriors so classified that officially, they didn't exist. The room fell silent.
The Admiral's laughter died in his throat. Because that small tattoo revealed a truth that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about the young woman standing before him. This is the true story of how one moment of recognition launched the most dangerous naval mission of the decade, and how the most underestimated officer in the Navy became its most legendary hero. The Pentagon's sub-basement conference room held the stale smell of recycled air and decades of classified conversations. Admiral James Richardson adjusted his uniform jacket as he reviewed the mission briefing one final time.
Operation Silent Thunder represented the Navy's most ambitious underwater rescue attempt in history, and he intended to handpick every member of the team personally. The mission parameters were brutal.
A Chinese submarine carrying American civilians had suffered catastrophic failure in the Mariana Trench, 7 miles below the Pacific surface. The crew and passengers had less than 72 hours of breathable air remaining. No vessel in the Chinese fleet could reach that depth, and political tensions made direct assistance impossible. The rescue had to appear completely coincidental, a routine American deep-sea research mission that just happened to discover the stranded submarine. Richardson had commanded successful operations in the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean, and the South China Sea. He understood pressure, both literal and figurative. But this mission required a commander with experience in deep-sea rescue operations, advanced submersible piloting, and the diplomatic finesse to navigate international waters without triggering a military incident. The conference room door opened, and Richardson looked up expecting to see Commander Marcus Webb, the veteran officer he'd specifically requested for this assignment. Instead, a young Asian American woman in dress blues walked confidently toward the conference table. "Admiral Richardson," she said, extending her hand. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, reporting as requested for Operation Silent Thunder briefing."
Richardson's eyebrows raised slightly.
"I think there's been some confusion, Commander.
I requested Marcus Webb for this assignment." Sarah maintained her professional smile.
"Commander Webb was reassigned to the Atlantic Fleet yesterday, sir. Captain Morrison recommended me as his replacement."
She placed a thick file folder on the table. "My complete service record and mission qualifications, as requested."
The Admiral barely glanced at the folder.
He'd seen this scenario countless times, promising young officers being fast-tracked through promotions to satisfy diversity requirements. Sarah appeared to be in her early 30s, which meant limited deep-water experience regardless of her paper qualifications. "Commander Chen," Richardson said, settling back in his chair, "this isn't a training exercise.
We're talking about a mission that will require split-second decisions at crushing depths where the margin for error is measured in microseconds.
The team leader needs extensive experience with advanced submersible operations."
"I understand completely, sir."
Sarah opened her folder and slid several documents across the table. "I've completed advanced training at the Navy Deep Submergence Unit, qualified on the Trieste-2 and Alvin research vessels, and logged over 200 hours in deep-sea rescue simulations." Richardson glanced at the training certificates with growing skepticism. Paper qualifications meant nothing at 7 miles underwater. "Commander, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but theoretical knowledge doesn't prepare someone for the psychological pressure of extreme depth operations." We're talking about an environment where a single technical failure means instant death for everyone involved. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Richardson noticed a slight tightening around her eyes.
Sir, with respect, my training has included extensive psychological preparation for extreme environments.
I've also completed survival courses in Arctic and desert conditions.
The Admiral couldn't suppress a slight chuckle.
Arctic survival courses?
Commander, we're not discussing land-based operations.
Deep-sea rescue requires a specific mindset that comes only from extensive underwater experience. The pressure down there, both physical and mental, can break even veteran submariners.
He stood and walked to the large tactical display showing the Pacific Ocean.
This mission will involve navigating through underwater mountain ranges, dealing with extreme pressure differentials, and coordinating with surface vessels while maintaining complete radio silence.
The team commander needs to make life or death decisions for both our crew and the civilians we're attempting to rescue.
Sarah followed his movement with her eyes but remained seated.
I understand the gravity of the situation, Admiral.
That's precisely why I volunteered for this assignment. Richardson turned back toward her, his expression growing more skeptical.
Volunteered? Commander, this isn't a career advancement opportunity. This is potentially a suicide mission disguised as a research expedition.
If something goes wrong at that depth, there's no backup plan and no possibility of rescue. I'm fully aware of the risks, sir.
Sarah's voice carried no trace of doubt or hesitation. The Admiral returned to his seat, studying the young woman across from him.
She had the confidence typical of officers who'd never faced real danger, the kind of self-assurance that evaporated the moment bullets started flying or pressure hulls began groaning under impossible stress.
Commander Chen, I need to be direct with you.
This mission requires someone with combat experience, someone who's faced impossible situations and found ways to survive. Your service record shows mostly training assignments and administrative positions.
Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, my record includes more than administrative work. Richardson flipped through her file quickly. 6 months in the South China Sea, mostly escort duty. 2 years training new submariners in Norfolk. Administrative position at Naval Intelligence for 18 months.
He closed the folder. I'm sure you're a competent officer, Commander, but competent isn't sufficient for this mission. The room fell silent except for the low hum of ventilation systems. Sarah stared at the Admiral for several long moments, her expression unreadable. Admiral, she said finally, I understand your concerns about my qualifications.
But I think there might be some information missing from that file.
Richardson leaned back in his chair. Such as? Instead of answering immediately, Sarah reached for her water glass and took a small sip. As she raised the glass, her dress blue sleeve slid back slightly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a tattoo on her forearm.
The Admiral's attention was immediately drawn to the dark marking.
Tattoos were common among enlisted personnel but less frequent among officers, particularly those seeking command positions. Sarah noticed his gaze and paused. For a moment, she seemed to be weighing her options. Then, with deliberate slowness, she pushed her sleeve back further, revealing the complete tattoo.
Richardson's breath caught in his throat.
The image was simple but unmistakable, a trident piercing through a skull, surrounded by the numbers 041. It was a symbol he hadn't seen in 20 years, one that belonged to an elite unit so classified that officially, it had never existed.
The Admiral's face went pale.
He stared at the tattoo for several seconds, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. When he finally looked up at Sarah's face, she was watching him with a completely different expression, the calm, steady gaze of someone who had indeed faced impossible situations and survived.
Commander, Richardson said quietly, that tattoo, where did you get it? Sarah rolled her sleeve back down with practiced efficiency. I think that's classified information, sir. Above your clearance level.
The Admiral felt his mouth go dry. Only one unit had used that particular symbol, and they'd been disbanded after a mission in the Taiwan Strait that officially never happened. According to every record he'd ever seen, all members of that unit had been killed or transferred to assignments so classified that their very existence had been erased from standard military databases.
How many people know about this?
Richardson asked, gesturing vaguely toward her arm.
The same number of people who know about the mission you're planning, sir.
Very few. Richardson stood and walked to the secure phone mounted on the conference room wall. He dialed a number from memory and waited through several clicks and transfers that indicated multiple levels of security clearance verification.
"This is Admiral Richardson," he said when the call finally connected.
"I need immediate confirmation on the background of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, currently assigned to my command."
He spelled out her full name and service number.
The conversation that followed lasted less than 2 minutes, but Richardson's expression changed dramatically during those brief moments. When he hung up the phone, he looked at Sarah with completely different eyes.
"Commander," he said, returning to the table, "I believe I owe you an apology." Sarah's expression didn't change. "No apology necessary, sir. You were doing your job."
Richardson sat down heavily, suddenly, feeling every one of his 58 years. "According to my sources, your actual service record is classified at levels I don't have access to."
"The file I've been reviewing is apparently a cover story."
"That's correct, sir."
"And the mission you were involved in during those missing years?"
"Also classified, sir."
The Admiral rubbed his temples, trying to process this new information. "Commander, I need to ask you directly. Are you qualified to command this rescue operation?" Sarah met his eyes steadily.
"Sir, I've commanded similar operations in more dangerous conditions than what we'll face in the Mariana Trench. I can't provide specifics, but I can tell you that this mission falls well within my area of expertise."
Richardson looked down at the mission briefing materials spread across the table. Everything had changed in the span of 5 minutes.
The young officer he'd dismissed as inexperienced and over-promoted was apparently one of the Navy's most classified assets, with experience in operations so secret that her very survival was considered top-secret information.
"Commander Chen," he said finally, "I'm officially placing you in command of Operation Silent Thunder. But I need to know, can you handle the pressure of commanding a mission where failure means the deaths of innocent civilians?" Sarah's response came without hesitation.
"Sir, I've handled worse pressure than that.
And I've never failed a mission." The Admiral believed her.
Looking at the calm competence in her eyes, he finally understood why Captain Morrison had recommended her as Webb's replacement.
This wasn't about diversity or fast-track promotions. This was about putting the most qualified person available in command of an impossible mission.
But, as he began to brief her on the operation's details, Richardson couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets Sarah wasn't sharing, and that before this mission was over, he was going to discover exactly what kind of person the Navy had really sent him. The USS Hadel positioned itself 200 miles northwest of Guam at precisely 0400 hours, its massive hull cutting through the Pacific swells like a steel cathedral moving through liquid darkness. Sarah stood on the bridge, watching the pre-dawn horizon through night vision binoculars while her assembled team made final preparations for the most dangerous descent in naval history. Admiral Richardson had departed the previous evening after completing the final mission briefing, but not before pulling Sarah aside for a private conversation that revealed just how much the Navy's high command knew about her classified background. "Commander," he'd said, "I've been authorized to tell you that this mission has presidential approval at the highest levels. The civilians on that Chinese submarine include the daughter of their defense minister. If she dies, it could destabilize the entire region."
Sarah had simply nodded.
She'd operated in situations where international stability hung by threads before, though she couldn't discuss those missions with anyone, including Admiral Richardson. Now, as the Hadel reached the designated coordinates above the Mariana Trench, Sarah reviewed her team one final time. Each member had been selected for specific expertise, but none of them knew about her true background or the real reason she'd been chosen to lead this operation. Lieutenant Commander David Tank Morrison served as the mission's chief engineer and submersible specialist. At 6 feet 4 inches and 250 pounds, Tank had earned his nickname honestly, but his massive hands could perform delicate repairs on submersible systems with surgical precision. He'd spent 12 years working on deep-sea research vessels and had more hours underwater than any other active duty officer. Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos brought communications expertise and language skills to the team. Born in the Philippines but raised in San Diego, she spoke fluent Mandarin and had experience in diplomatic liaison work. Her job would be to establish communication with the stranded Chinese submarine crew without revealing the true nature of their rescue mission. Lieutenant James Sonar Patterson handled all acoustic systems and underwater navigation. His ability to read sonar displays bordered on supernatural, and he could identify underwater obstacles and threats that other operators missed entirely. Sarah had specifically requested him after reviewing recordings of his work during previous deep-sea operations. The final team member was Dr. Emily Watson, a civilian contractor and deep-sea medical specialist. Her presence was necessary because the Chinese submarine crew had been underwater for nearly 48 hours, and they might be suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning or other life-threatening conditions when the rescue team reached them. Sarah gathered her team in the Hadel's main briefing compartment for final mission review. The submersible Nereus sat in the ship's deployment bay, its titanium hull gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. The vehicle could theoretically reach the deepest parts of any ocean, but it had never been tested under the specific conditions they would face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, "in 2 hours we begin descent to 36,000 feet below sea level. Our mission parameters are simple but extremely dangerous. We locate the Chinese submarine Yangtze, establish communication, and provide emergency life support until their own rescue vessels can arrive." Tank raised his hand. "Commander, what's our cover story if Chinese naval vessels detect us first? We're conducting deep-sea geological research for the National Science Foundation." Dr. Watson's presence supports that story, since she's officially here to study extremophile bacteria in deep ocean trenches. Sarah pulled up a tactical display showing the descent route. "Chinese satellites are tracking our position, but they believe we're engaged in routine scientific work." Santos leaned forward. "What about their submarine's crew? They're going to know we're military when we make contact." "That's where your language skills become critical, Chief Santos. You'll establish initial communication and explain that we're a joint scientific expedition that happened to detect their distress signals. We're offering humanitarian assistance, nothing more." Sonar Patterson studied the depth charts with obvious concern. "Commander, the pressure at that depth is over 15,000 pounds per square inch. If we suffer any hull damage or system failures, we won't have time to reach the surface before the submersible implodes." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's why we've prepared for multiple contingencies. Tank, you'll monitor all engineering systems continuously. Any sign of hull stress or mechanical problems, we abort immediately." Dr. Watson spoke up for the first time. "What about the psychological pressure on the Chinese crew? They've been trapped for 2 days in a disabled submarine. Some of them might be in shock or suffering from panic attacks." "We'll cross that bridge when we reach it, Doctor. Your job is to keep our team healthy during descent and ascent. If we can establish contact with the Yangtze's crew, we'll assess their condition and provide whatever assistance we can." Sarah moved to a different display showing the ocean floor topography. The Yangtze is resting on a narrow ledge approximately 7 miles down. The ledge is stable, but there's a 4-mile drop on either side. We'll have no room for navigation errors. The briefing continued for another hour, covering emergency procedures, communication protocols, and equipment redundancies. Sarah noticed that her team members asked sharp, professional questions that demonstrated their competence, but she also detected underlying anxiety about the mission's dangers. As the meeting concluded, Tank approached her privately. "Commander, can I ask you something? I've been working deep-sea operations for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone as calm as you are about descending to crush depth. Have you done this kind of work before?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've worked in high-pressure environments, Tank." "Different kind of pressure, but pressure nonetheless." Her answer seemed to satisfy him, but she could see that he sensed there was more to her background than her official record indicated. The same intuition that made him an exceptional engineer also made him perceptive about people. 2 hours later, the Nereus was lowered into the Pacific's dark waters. The submersible's lights pierced only a few meters into the oceanic blackness as they began their descent into the deepest parts of the world's deepest ocean. Sarah occupied the commander's position in the submersible's cramped control compartment, surrounded by banks of instruments and monitoring systems. Tank sat beside her at the engineering console, his massive fingers dancing over controls with surprising delicacy. Santos and Patterson operated communications and sonar equipment from the rear compartment, while Dr. Watson monitored atmospheric conditions and crew health. The descent began smoothly. At 1,000 feet, they passed through a layer of luminescent plankton that created a brief light show outside their viewports. At 5,000 feet, the water temperature dropped to near freezing, and the pressure began to affect some of their more sensitive instruments. Hull integrity holding steady, Tank reported as they passed 10,000 feet. All systems operating within normal parameters. Sonar shows clear water ahead, Patterson added. No obstacles or debris detected on our descent path. Sarah monitored their progress on the depth gauge, watching the numbers climb steadily higher. At 20,000 feet, they encountered their first significant challenge. A strong underwater current caught the Nereus and pushed them several degrees off their planned course. Adjusting for current drift, Sarah announced, manipulating the submersible's thrusters to compensate. Tank, monitor power consumption. We need to maintain enough battery reserve for the return trip. Roger that, Commander. Current consumption is higher than planned, but still within acceptable limits. At 25,000 feet, the pressure gauge showed readings that made even experienced deep-sea operators nervous. The submersible's titanium hull was designed to withstand these forces, but theory and reality sometimes diverged at crushing depths. Commander, Santos called from the communications station, I'm detecting faint signals on the emergency frequencies. Could be the Chinese submarine trying to establish contact with their surface vessels. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Can you establish the signal source? Working on it. Yes, signals are coming from approximately 31,000 feet down, bearing 027 degrees northeast. That matches the Yangtze's last known position, Patterson confirmed, checking his sonar displays. We should have visual contact within the next hour if we maintain current descent rate. The final stretch of their descent proved the most challenging. At 30,000 feet, they encountered a series of underwater thermal layers that created turbulence and reduced visibility. The submersible's lights revealed strange geological formations and occasional deep-sea creatures that had never been studied by marine biologists. Commander, I've got something on sonar, Patterson announced suddenly. Large metallic object, approximately 6,000 feet below us. Shape and size consistent with a nuclear submarine. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They'd located their target, but now came the truly dangerous part of the mission. Making contact with a disabled submarine in the deepest part of the world's oceans, while maintaining a cover story that would satisfy both American and Chinese authorities. Take us down, Tank. Santos, prepare to establish communication on standard emergency frequencies. Use Mandarin, and remember our cover story. As the Nereus descended toward the ocean floor, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. The Admiral had initially dismissed her as inexperienced and unqualified, but the truth was that she'd commanded operations far more dangerous than this one. The difference was that those missions had taken place in environments where failure meant starting a war rather than simply losing her own life. At 35,000 feet, their lights finally illuminated the Yangtze's dark bulk resting on a narrow underwater ledge. The Chinese submarine appeared intact but motionless, its emergency lights creating an eerie glow in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. My God, Dr. Watson whispered, staring at their target through the viewport. How did they survive the descent? That submarine wasn't designed for these depths. Sarah studied the Yangtze's position carefully. The submarine was resting at a precarious angle, with its bow pointing toward a drop-off that disappeared into even deeper darkness. Any attempt to move the vessel could send it tumbling into the abyssal depths where no rescue would be possible. Santos, establish communication. Let them know that help has arrived. As the chief petty officer began transmitting in fluent Mandarin, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was about to become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The Chinese submarine's position suggested that its crew had been attempting something more than routine operations when disaster struck. And, in her experience, when operations went wrong in international waters, the consequences were never simple. The first response from the Yangtze came as a burst of static-filled Mandarin that made Santos lean closer to her communication equipment. She listened intently for several moments before turning to Sarah with a puzzled expression.
"Commander, they're not responding to standard emergency protocols."
The voice on the radio sounds strange.
"Almost like someone who's been breathing bad air for too long."
Sarah moved to the communication station and took the microphone.
"This is Dr. Sarah Chen, leading a deep-sea research expedition.
We detected your distress signals and are offering humanitarian assistance.
What is your current status?"
The response came after a long delay, spoken in heavily accented English.
"American vessel, this is Captain Lu Wei of the People's Liberation Army Navy.
We were not expecting rescue from your country."
Santos translated quickly, "He's being very formal, Commander. But there's something else. He's speaking like someone who's fighting to stay conscious."
Probably carbon dioxide poisoning.
Tank monitored the sonar readings while keeping one eye on the Yangtze's position. "Commander, their submarine is definitely taking on water. I'm reading irregular ballast patterns. They're using emergency procedures to maintain position on that ledge." Through the Nereus's forward viewport, Sarah could see the Chinese submarine's hull more clearly.
Emergency lights flickered along its length, and she noticed several areas where the outer plating appeared damaged. Whatever had brought the Yangtze to these depths hadn't been a routine dive.
"Captain Lu," Sarah transmitted, "we're scientists conducting deep ocean research.
We have limited rescue capabilities, but we can provide emergency life support and coordinate with surface vessels."
"How many crew members do you have aboard?"
Another long pause, filled with static and background noise that sounded like struggling machinery. We have 23 crew members and 4 civilian passengers.
"Our emergency systems are failing. Oxygen recycling is compromised." Dr. Watson moved to Sarah's shoulder. "Commander, if they've been down there for 2 days with failing life support, some of them might be unconscious by now. Carbon dioxide poisoning causes confusion and, eventually, coma."
Sarah nodded, then returned to the radio.
"Captain Lu, we're going to maneuver closer to your position. Can you prepare an airlock for emergency docking? We have portable life support equipment." "Negative," came the immediate response. "Our hull integrity is compromised. Any attempt to dock could cause catastrophic failure." Tank studied his engineering displays with growing concern. "Commander, he's right.
Their submarine is in bad shape. If we try to dock and something goes wrong, both vessels could be lost."
Patterson's sonar equipment began showing new readings. "Commander, I'm detecting movement above us. Large surface vessels, approximately 40,000 feet up.
Multiple ships, heading this way at high speed." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The arrival of other vessels meant their window of opportunity was closing rapidly.
Once Chinese naval ships reached the area, the fiction of a coincidental scientific rescue would become much harder to maintain.
Santos asked Captain Lu what caused their emergency descent.
"We need to understand what we're dealing with."
The chief petty officer transmitted the question in Mandarin, then listened to a response that lasted nearly a minute. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she translated. "Commander, he says they were conducting deep water intelligence gathering when they suffered a catastrophic electrical failure.
Their main systems failed simultaneously, and they couldn't control their descent."
"But..."
Santos hesitated. "But what, Chief?" He's being evasive about the specifics. "And there's something else."
He mentioned that they were tracking an American nuclear submarine when the accident occurred. The cramped control compartment fell silent except for the steady hum of the Nereus's life support systems.
Sarah processed this new information quickly.
If the Chinese had been conducting intelligence operations against American submarines, this rescue mission had just become exponentially more complicated.
Dr. Watson, Sarah said quietly, what's your assessment of their crew's condition based on what you've heard? The medical specialist reviewed her notes. Carbon dioxide poisoning is definitely affecting their cognitive function.
But, based on the captain's speech patterns, they probably have several hours before the situation becomes life-threatening.
Tank looked up from his instruments. Commander, we've got another problem. Those surface ships Patterson detected are Chinese naval vessels. If we stay here much longer, we're going to have to explain our presence to their military. Sarah weighed their options quickly.
The original mission plan had assumed they would have several hours to establish contact and provide assistance before any other vessels arrived.
Now they had perhaps 30 minutes before Chinese warships reached the area. Captain Liu, she transmitted, we're going to attempt emergency life support transfer. Can you release emergency buoys with breathing apparatus attached?
We can collect them and provide you with improved air supply.
Impossible, came the response. Our emergency systems are completely non-functional. We cannot release anything from the submarine. Patterson suddenly looked up from his sonar display. Commander, I'm detecting something else.
There's another submarine approximately 2 miles east of here, much deeper water.
It's not moving, but the acoustic signature suggests it's American.
Sarah's blood ran cold. The presence of an American submarine in the area, combined with the Chinese vessel's intelligence mission, suggested a scenario far more dangerous than a simple rescue operation.
Can you identify the American submarine, sonar? Negative, Commander. It's too far away and too deep for detailed analysis.
But the size and configuration suggest it's one of our attack submarines.
Santos received another transmission from the Chinese vessel. Commander, Captain Liu is asking about the American submarine.
He wants to know if we're part of a coordinated military operation. Sarah realized that the success of their mission now depended on maintaining their scientific cover story while dealing with what appeared to be an underwater international incident. The Chinese believed they'd been tracking an American submarine when their systems failed. The Americans had a submarine in the area that might or might not be part of the rescue operation. And both vessels were now sitting in the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean while Chinese warships approached from above.
Santos, tell Captain Liu that we're purely scientific researchers.
We're not affiliated with any military operations in this area.
Our only concern is providing humanitarian assistance.
As the chief petty officer transmitted this message, Tank noticed new readings on his engineering displays.
Commander, the Yangtze's position is shifting.
They're sliding toward the edge of that ledge. If they fall off, there won't be anything we can do to help them.
Sarah moved to the viewport and studied the Chinese submarine's precarious position.
The vessel was indeed moving slowly but steadily toward a drop-off that would send it tumbling into even deeper waters. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the Yangtze slipped beyond any possibility of rescue.
Tank, can we use our manipulator arms to stabilize their position?
Maybe, but it would be extremely risky. If we make contact with their hull and something goes wrong, we could damage both vessels.
Dr. Watson pointed to her atmospheric monitors. Commander, we have another issue.
Our own life support is being strained by the extended deep-water operation. We need to begin ascent procedures within the next 45 minutes or risk our own crew's safety.
Sarah faced an impossible choice.
They could attempt to stabilize the Chinese submarine's position, but doing so would risk both vessels and would clearly violate their cover story as scientific researchers. Alternatively, they could provide what assistance they could while maintaining their fiction, but the Chinese crew would probably die when their submarine slipped off the underwater ledge. The radio crackled with a new transmission from Captain Liu. This time, his voice carried a note of desperation that transcended language barriers.
Santos translated quickly.
He says they're losing hull integrity rapidly. Water is entering their forward compartments, and they're having trouble maintaining ballast control. He's asking if we can transfer their civilian passengers to our vessel.
Negative, Sarah responded immediately. Our submersible doesn't have capacity for additional personnel.
But, we might be able to guide them to a more stable position.
Tank shook his head.
Commander, their submarine is too damaged to maneuver safely.
Any attempt to move could cause complete hull failure. Patterson's sonar suddenly showed new activity. Multiple underwater contacts approaching from the south. Chinese submarines moving fast. ETA approximately 20 minutes.
Sarah realized that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. In 20 minutes, they would be surrounded by Chinese naval vessels both above and below the water. Their scientific cover story would be tested by military personnel trained to detect deception. But, the most immediate problem remained the Yangtze's precarious position. If Captain Lu's submarine slipped off the underwater ledge, 27 people would die in the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean.
Tank, Sarah said quietly, what would happen if we used our thrusters to create an underwater current that might push the Yangtze away from the ledge?
It might work, but we'd have to position ourselves between their submarine and the drop-off.
If something goes wrong, we'd go over the edge first.
Sarah studied the tactical situation for several more moments. Every option carried enormous risks, both for her crew and for the people they were trying to save. But, as she watched the Yangtze's lights flickering in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, she realized that the greatest risk would be doing nothing.
All right, people, she announced to her crew.
We're going to try something that's never been attempted at this depth. Tank, prepare to maneuver us into position below the Chinese submarine.
We're going to become their anchor.
The Nereus descended through the crushing darkness toward the most dangerous position in the deepest ocean. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had carried her through impossible missions before, but this time the stakes felt different. Her crew trusted her judgment completely, unaware that she was drawing on experience from operations that officially never happened. Commander, Tank said, his voice tight with concentration, I need you to understand what we're attempting. We're going to position ourselves directly beneath a damaged submarine that weighs 4,000 tons.
If their hull fails while we're underneath them, the falling debris will crush us instantly. Sarah nodded, watching the Yangtze grow larger through their viewport. I understand, Tank.
But, if we don't try this, they're all going to die anyway. Santos, maintain communication with Captain Lu. I need to know immediately if their situation changes. Dr. Watson monitored atmospheric readings while preparing emergency medical supplies. Commander, even if this works, we still have the problem of transferring life support to their crew.
We can't physically dock with their vessel. One problem at a time, Doctor.
Sarah manipulated the Nereus's thrusters with precise control, moving them into position directly below the Chinese submarine.
Patterson, what's the status of those approaching contacts?
Chinese submarines are 15 minutes out, moving at maximum speed.
Surface vessels are approximately 12 minutes away. Patterson paused, studying his sonar display more carefully. Commander, there's something else. That American submarine we detected earlier is moving. It's ascending slowly and heading in our direction.
Sarah felt her stomach clench.
The last thing they needed was an American attack submarine arriving at the same time as Chinese naval vessels.
What had begun as a humanitarian rescue mission was turning into an underwater diplomatic crisis.
Tank, initiate thruster sequence. We need to create enough upward current to prevent the Yangtze from sliding off that ledge.
The engineering specialist's massive hands moved over his controls with surgical precision.
Beginning thruster sequence now. Commander, this is going to use a tremendous amount of power.
We might not have enough battery reserve for a normal ascent.
We'll worry about that later.
Sarah watched as the Nereus positioned itself beneath the Chinese submarine like a pilot fish beneath a whale. The size difference was overwhelming. Their small research submersible was dwarfed by the military vessel above them.
Santos received a burst of urgent Mandarin from the Yangtze. Commander, Captain Lu reports that their ballast controls have failed completely. They're taking on water in multiple compartments.
He estimates they have less than 10 minutes before the submarine becomes too heavy to remain on the ledge.
Tank activated the Nereus's main thrusters, directing their full output upward toward the Chinese submarine's hull.
The vibration was tremendous, and every instrument in their cramped compartment registered the strain on their systems. "It's working," Patterson reported, monitoring the acoustic readings.
"The Yangtze's position is stabilizing.
"But, Commander, our power consumption is off the charts.
We can maintain this for maybe 5 more minutes."
Through the viewport, Sarah could see the Chinese submarine's hull just meters above them, close enough to make out individual rivets and damage marks on the steel plating. Any shift in position could bring thousands of tons of metal crashing down on the Nereus. Santos asked Captain Liu if they can transfer their crew to life pods. "If they can get their people out of the submarine, we might be able to guide the pods to the surface." The chief petty officer transmitted the request and listened to the response with growing frustration.
"Negative, Commander. Their life pod systems were damaged in the initial accident. The crew is trapped inside the submarine." Dr. Watson looked up from her medical equipment. "Commander, I have an idea. What if we could establish a temporary atmosphere connection? We have enough emergency breathing equipment to supply their crew for several hours." Tank shook his head without looking away from his controls. "Doctor, we can't dock with their submarine.
Any physical contact could damage both vessels."
"Not docking," Dr. Watson explained. "Emergency atmosphere transfer. We have pressurized breathing equipment that could be transferred through the water using magnetic clamps." Sarah considered this option quickly.
It was technically possible, but it would require one of her crew members to exit the Nereus in an atmospheric suit at crushing depth, something that had never been attempted at this depth.
"Who's qualified for external operations?" she asked.
"I am," Tank replied immediately.
"I've done atmospheric suit work before, just never this deep." Patterson suddenly looked up from his sonar display. "Commander, the American submarine just changed course.
It's heading directly for our position.
ETA approximately 8 minutes."
Sarah felt the weight of multiple crises converging simultaneously. Chinese naval vessels approaching from above and below, an American submarine heading toward them, and 27 people trapped in a failing submarine that she was barely managing to keep stable.
"Tank, how long can we maintain thrust before our batteries fail?" 3 minutes, maybe 4 at the outside." Santos received another transmission from Captain Liu. This time, the Chinese captain's voice carried obvious desperation. "Commander," he says, "their atmospheric recycling has completely failed. They're breathing emergency reserves that will last maybe 20 more minutes."
Sarah made her decision.
"Tank, prepare for external operations. Dr. Watson, get the emergency breathing equipment ready for transfer.
Patterson, monitor all contacts and give me constant updates on their positions." "Commander," Tank said, "external operations at this depth are incredibly dangerous.
The pressure suit might not hold, and if something goes wrong, there won't be time for rescue procedures." "I understand the risks, Tank. But we're not leaving those people to die." As Tank began preparing the atmospheric suit, Patterson detected new movement on his sonar display. "Commander, the American submarine has stopped approximately 1 mile away. It's maintaining position and, wait a minute."
He studied the acoustic signature more carefully.
"That's not an attack submarine. Based on the acoustic profile, that's a rescue vessel. Probably the USS Mystic."
Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with new complications. The Mystic was the Navy's most advanced deep-sea rescue submarine, capable of operations at depths that would crush conventional vessels. But its presence in the area would make their scientific cover story impossible to maintain.
"Santos, has Captain Liu detected the American rescue vessel?"
The chief petty officer transmitted the question and received an immediate response.
"Yes, Commander.
He wants to know if this is a coordinated military operation.
He's asking if we're part of an American naval task force."
Sarah realized that maintaining their cover story was no longer possible. The presence of multiple submarines, both Chinese and American, had turned their rescue operation into an obvious military engagement. But the lives of 27 people still hung in the balance.
"Santos, tell Captain Liu the truth. We're American military personnel conducting a humanitarian rescue operation.
We're not affiliated with the other American submarine, and we have no hostile intentions toward his vessel or crew. The response came quickly, and Santos translated with obvious relief. He says he appreciates our honesty, Commander. He's requesting immediate assistance with atmospheric transfer. His crew is beginning to lose consciousness. Tank had finished preparing the emergency breathing equipment and was climbing into the pressure suit. Commander, I need you to understand something. Once I exit this submersible, we're committed to this rescue attempt. There won't be any option to abort if things go wrong. Sarah nodded. Tank, I've never asked anyone to take risks I wouldn't take myself. If you're not comfortable with this operation, I'll do it instead. The massive engineer paused in his preparations and looked at Sarah with new understanding. Commander, I don't know what operations you've been involved in before, but I can see that you're not asking me to do anything you haven't done yourself. I trust your judgment. Patterson announced new contacts on his sonar display. Chinese submarines are 5 minutes out. Surface vessels are 7 minutes away. And the American rescue submarine is beginning to move again. Dr. Watson completed her preparations and turned to Sarah. Commander, the emergency breathing equipment is ready for transfer. Tank will be able to establish atmospheric connection with the Chinese submarine within 10 minutes of exiting our vessel. Sarah took a final look at their tactical situation. They were 7 miles underwater, surrounded by approaching military vessels from 2 different nations, attempting a rescue operation that had never been tried at these depths. Her crew was risking their lives based on her judgment and experience, but they still didn't know the full extent of her qualifications. All right, people, Sarah announced. Tank, begin external operations. Santos, maintain communication with both the Chinese submarine and any other vessels that attempt contact. Patterson, monitor all underwater activity and warn us immediately if anything changes. Dr. Watson, be ready to provide emergency medical assistance to anyone who needs it. As Tank prepared to exit the Nereus into the crushing darkness of the deepest ocean, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. Admiral Richardson had initially questioned her qualifications for this mission, but the truth was that everything she'd learned in her classified operations had prepared her for exactly this kind of impossible situation. The difference was that this time, success wouldn't just prevent an international incident, it would save the lives of 27 people who were depending on her to find a way to achieve the impossible. Tank's massive frame disappeared into the crushing darkness beyond the Nereus's airlock, connected only by the atmospheric umbilical that would keep him alive in the deepest reaches of the Pacific Ocean. Sarah watched his progress through the external cameras, knowing that what they were attempting had never been tried at these depths. Tank, report your status, Sarah called through the communication system. External systems functioning normally, Commander. Pressure suit holding steady. Beginning approach to the Chinese submarine's emergency access port. Through the viewport, Sarah could see Tank's lights moving slowly toward the Yangtze's hull, carrying the emergency breathing equipment that might save 27 lives. The Chinese submarine appeared even more damaged from this close perspective. Hull plates were buckled, and emergency systems flickered erratically along its length. Patterson monitored the approaching contacts with growing urgency. Commander, Chinese submarines are 3 minutes out. The lead vessel is transmitting on military frequencies, demanding identification of all vessels in the area. Santos listened to the Chinese transmissions and translated quickly. They're ordering us to surface immediately and prepare for inspection. They consider this a potential act of espionage. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had carried her through impossible missions, but she also understood that they were rapidly approaching a point where diplomatic solutions might not be possible. Santos, respond in Mandarin. Tell them we're conducting humanitarian rescue operations for their submarine Yangtze. Request permission to continue life support operations. The response came immediately, filled with suspicion and authority. Santos translated with obvious concern. The Chinese commander says they have no record of the Yangtze requesting American assistance. He's demanding that we cease all operations and prepare for boarding. Tank's voice came through the communication system with urgency.
Commander, I've reached the Chinese submarine's emergency port.
I can see crew members through the porthole.
Several appear to be unconscious. I need to establish atmospheric connection immediately.
Do it, Tank.
We'll handle the diplomatic situation.
Dr. Watson monitored Tank's vital signs while tracking the atmospheric transfer process.
Commander, Tank's pressure suit is performing at maximum capacity.
Any increase in depth or pressure could cause system failure.
Patterson suddenly detected new movement on his sonar display. The American rescue submarine is accelerating toward our position. ETA 2 minutes. Commander, they're transmitting on emergency frequencies.
Sarah took the communication handset.
USS Mystic, this is Commander Sarah Chen aboard the deep-sea research vessel Nereus.
We are conducting humanitarian rescue operations.
The response came immediately in a voice she didn't recognize. Commander Chen, this is Captain Robert Hayes aboard the USS Mystic. We've been monitoring your operation. Are you in need of assistance?
Sarah realized that the presence of an American military rescue submarine would make it impossible to maintain any pretense of being civilian researchers. Captain Hayes, we have successfully established contact with Chinese submarine Yangtze.
We are attempting atmospheric transfer to their crew. Understood, Commander.
Be advised that Chinese naval vessels are converging on your position.
We are prepared to provide diplomatic support if needed. Tank's voice interrupted the communication. Commander, I've successfully connected emergency breathing equipment to the Chinese submarine. But there's a problem. Their hull damage is worse than we thought. I can see water entering their forward compartments. They don't have much time. Santos received a new transmission from Captain Liu aboard the Yangtze.
Commander, he says the emergency breathing equipment is working, but their submarine is losing buoyancy rapidly. They're sliding toward the edge of the ledge again.
Sarah looked at the depth readings and realized they faced an impossible choice.
Tank was outside the Nereus, connected to the Chinese submarine by emergency breathing equipment.
If the Yangtze slipped off the underwater ledge, it would take Tank with it into the abyssal depths. Tank, disconnect immediately and return to the submersible. Negative, Commander. If I disconnect now, the Chinese crew will lose atmospheric support within minutes. I can maintain connection while you try to stabilize their position. Patterson announced new contacts. Chinese submarines have arrived. 3 vessels surrounding our position.
They're demanding immediate communication. Sarah took the radio and spoke in the clearest Mandarin she could manage.
Chinese naval vessels, this is the American research vessel Nereus. We are providing emergency life support to your submarine Yangtze. 27 lives are at stake.
The response came from multiple Chinese vessels simultaneously, creating a confusion of voices and static. Santos sorted through the transmissions and translated the main message.
They're ordering all American vessels to cease operations and surface immediately. They're threatening to use force if we don't comply.
Dr. Watson monitored atmospheric readings while tracking Tank's status.
Commander, Tank can't maintain external operations much longer.
The pressure is affecting his suit systems, and the emergency breathing equipment he installed has limited capacity.
Sarah studied their tactical situation quickly. Chinese submarines surrounded them above and below.
The American rescue submarine Mystic was approaching rapidly. Tank was outside their vessel, keeping 27 people alive through sheer determination and emergency equipment.
Captain Hayes, Sarah called to the American rescue vessel, "What are your capabilities for emergency crew transfer at this depth?" Commander Chen, the Mystic can dock with submarines at any depth in the ocean.
But we would need cooperation from the Chinese vessel, and their submarine appears too damaged for standard docking procedures. Tank's voice came through the communication system with obvious strain.
Commander, the Chinese submarine is definitely sliding. I can feel the movement. We have maybe 5 minutes before it goes over the edge.
Sarah made her decision based on experience from operations that officially never happened. Captain Hayes, prepare for emergency rescue operations.
Santos, tell the Chinese commander that we're going to transfer their crew to American vessels.
Tell him this is humanitarian assistance, not a military operation.
The response from the Chinese vessels was immediate and angry. Santos translated with obvious concern. They're rejecting any transfer to American submarines.
They're ordering their own rescue vessels to handle the situation.
How long until their rescue vessels arrive? Sarah asked.
Santos transmitted the question and received a response that made her face go pale.
20 minutes, Commander. The Chinese crew doesn't have 20 minutes. Tank reported new problems. Commander, I can see inside the Chinese submarine through their porthole.
Several crew members are unconscious, and water is rising in their forward compartments. The emergency breathing equipment is helping, but they need full rescue operations within the next few minutes. Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her career. She could order Tank to disconnect and return to the Nereus, saving her own crew but condemning 27 people to death. Alternatively, she could continue the rescue operation, risking an international incident that could have consequences far beyond this single mission.
Captain Hayes, she called to the Mystic, can you establish emergency docking with the Chinese submarine despite the hull damage?
It's possible, Commander, but extremely risky.
If their submarine breaks apart during docking, both vessels could be lost. Patterson detected new activity on sonar.
Commander, the Chinese rescue submarines are approaching, but they're still 15 minutes away.
Also, there's something else. I'm detecting stress fractures in the underwater ledge.
The whole formation might be unstable.
Dr. Watson looked up from her medical monitors.
Commander, if that ledge collapses, everyone in the area could be affected.
We might need to evacuate this entire section of the ocean floor.
Tank's voice came through the communication system with urgent clarity.
Commander, I can see Chinese crew members at their emergency port. They're trying to tell me something important.
He paused, listening to muffled voices. They're saying their submarine was damaged by an underwater landslide, not equipment failure.
The entire area is geologically unstable. Sarah suddenly understood the real danger they faced.
The Chinese submarine hadn't suffered random equipment failure, they'd been caught in an underwater geological event that was still ongoing.
The ledge where the Yangtze now rested was part of an unstable formation that could collapse at any moment. All vessels, this is Commander Chen, she announced on emergency frequencies.
We have evidence of ongoing geological instability in this area.
Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel.
The Chinese vessels responded with suspicion, but Captain Hayes aboard the Mystic confirmed her assessment.
Commander Chen, our geological sensors are detecting seismic activity consistent with underwater landslides. This entire section of the ocean floor is unstable. Santos received a transmission from the Chinese submarine that made her look shocked.
Commander, Captain Liu is reporting that their submarine detected massive geological movement just before their systems failed.
He thinks the entire underwater mountain range is shifting. Tank's voice carried new urgency. Commander, I can feel vibrations in the water. Something big is moving down here.
Sarah realized they had perhaps minutes to evacuate all personnel before a catastrophic underwater landslide buried everything in the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean.
Captain Hayes, immediate emergency rescue of all personnel.
Chinese vessels, coordinate with American rescue submarine for emergency evacuation. For the first time since the crisis began, the Chinese commander responded with cooperation rather than suspicion.
Santos translated quickly. He's accepting assistance from the Mystic. All vessels are authorized to conduct emergency evacuation. Tank worked frantically to disconnect the emergency breathing equipment while preparing the Chinese crew for transfer to the rescue submarine.
Commander, the Yangtze's crew is ready for emergency evacuation, but I need to guide them to the transfer point. Dr. Watson monitored seismic activity on her geological sensors.
Commander, we're detecting massive movement approximately 2 miles below us. This whole area is going to collapse.
Over the next 10 minutes, Tank guided 23 Chinese crew members and for civilian passengers through the most dangerous rescue operation ever attempted in the deepest ocean. The USS Mystic established emergency docking with the damaged Yangtze while the Nereus maintained position, ready to assist with any complications.
Captain Liu was the last person to leave his submarine.
As Tank helped him through the transfer to the American rescue vessel, the Chinese captain spoke directly to Sarah through the communication system. "Commander Chen," he said in careful English, "I do not know who you really are, but I know you are not just a scientist.
Thank you for saving my crew."
Sarah smiled, watching Tank return safely to the Nereus while the Mystic began emergency ascent with the Chinese survivors.
"Captain Liu, sometimes the most important missions are the ones that never officially happen."
As all vessels cleared the area, the underwater ledge collapsed in a massive landslide that buried the Yangtze forever. But 27 people who should have died in the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean were alive because a Navy commander with a classified past had refused to abandon them.
Admiral Richardson met them when they reached the surface 12 hours later. As Sarah climbed aboard the USS Hadel, the Admiral shook her hand with obvious respect.
"Commander Chen," he said quietly, "I think I owe you more than an apology."
"I owe you my complete confidence in your abilities." Sarah nodded, watching the Chinese rescue vessels recovering their people in the distance. "Admiral, sometimes the best qualifications aren't written in official files.
Sometimes they're written in experiences that officially never happened." Richardson studied the tattoo on her arm, now understanding that it represented far more than he'd initially realized. "Commander, whatever operations you were involved in before, I'm grateful that experience was available when we needed it most."
As the task force headed back toward Pearl Harbor, Sarah reflected on the mission's outcome.
27 lives had been saved through the coordinated efforts of American and Chinese naval personnel, despite the political tensions that normally kept their countries' militaries apart. The operation would be classified at levels that ensured it never appeared in official histories, but Sarah knew that the most important victories were often the ones that remained secret. Sometimes the greatest measure of success was simply that people continued to live who otherwise would have died. And sometimes the most qualified person for an impossible mission was exactly the person that others assumed couldn't handle the pressure.